Welcome to Time for Tots. Our story today is Spaghetti with the Yeti, and the author is Lee Wildish. And there's a big plate of spaghetti, and I'm thinking, you think that could be a Yeti? Let's find out. A boy called George had an excellent plan to go and discover the Yeti. He put in his backpack a warm woolly hat, a map, and a tin of spaghetti. So there he is with the spaghetti in his hand, holding his backpack, getting all set to go. Slowly, George climbed up a steep mountain path in search of the mythical beast, when he stumbled straight into a monster who was eating a sumptuous feast. "Hooray!" shouted George. "I knew you'd be here. I'm sure that you must be the Yeti." The monster stood up with a furious gaze. "Are you crazy? My name is Betty." And there's Betty. She's definitely not pretty, is she? She's all bumpy, and look at her teeth. Ugh. "So sorry, Betty," said George with a smile, "but I'm taking the Yeti some lunch. In that case, you'll want to take some of these bones, for the Yeti likes food with a crunch." So there she's got some bones. So George climbed on up the steep mountain path to track down the hideaway brute, when he stumbled upon a big monster with a face like a battered old boot. "Yippee!" shouted George. "I've tracked you down now. I've been searching so long for the Yeti." The monster glared down with the angriest growl. "How insulting! My name is Hetty." And there's another monster. Look at all that long purple hair. "So sorry, Hetty," said George with a sigh, "but I'm taking the Yeti a treat. In that case, you'll want to take one of these goats, for the Yeti likes food with a bleat." So now George, look, there's his backpack. He's got the bones from the first monster, and now he's dragging the goat from the second monster. So George trudged on up the steep mountain path, dragging the goat by her tail, when he spotted a shape in the distance and heard the most bone-chilling wail. "Hooray!" shouted George. "At last it is you! I've been looking so hard for the Yeti." The monster looked down with a horrible howl. "Are you bonkers? My name is Nettie. And look, now we have a green monster." "So sorry, Nettie," sighed George, feeling glum, "but I'm taking the Yeti a snack. In that case, you'll want to take lobsters and crabs, for the Yeti likes food he can crack." So there she's got a lobster and a crab in her hand for George to add to his backpack for the Yeti. So George plodded on up the steep mountain path. The difficult climb made him puff. Exhausted, he threw himself down on the ground. "That's it," he cried. "I've had enough." As George sat despondent, his head in his hands, a shadow fell over that place. He felt something hairy, a prod in the back. And look, there's a big hand, lots of hair on the arm, and look at that foot with all the hair. And he's giving George a little poke. And then George turned and peered up at a face. Look at that big red nose. "I found you!" cried George with a big happy grin. And he stowed all his gifts, and he showed all his gifts to the Yeti. But the monster looked down at the crab and the goat and said, "Sorry, I just eat spaghetti." "I knew it," said George with a whoop of delight. And he opened the battered old tin. Then he tipped the spaghetti out into a bowl. And look, the Yeti is happy now. He's going thumbs up. And George and the Yeti tucked in. See? The Yeti has a tiny little spoon. And George's spoon is probably the same size, but it's the right size for him, and they're both eating spaghetti. Well, of course, we need to make some of those monsters, don't we? So the first one was a brown one, so I made a brown one, and she had all these spines on her back. So I put some clothespins on for the spines to make them stick out. And so I'm kind of like the first one, the warty Yeti that's all brown. And then we ran into a purple one. So to make your monsters, I took a whole thing of yarn, and I just took a Rubbermaid lid and I wound the yarn all the way around. And then I just cut it in half. Hang on to one side so all those yarns don't get away on you. There we go. I've got all this long yarn, and then I just went in half and I cut it again. Or if you want a top knot, you could just tie a piece of string around it, or you could cut it in half. I think for today I'll just wind this piece of yarn around here. Tie it good and tight. And then we can do this, and we can be like the purple monster, right? If we can't see, we can go like this. And then the green monster had that wonderful hairnet on, so I just went to the local pharmacy and I picked up this little bit of netting, and then I picked up a little package with these little hair clips, and I put them on. And then we can just put this on and we can have a hat like the green monster. And then when we're tired of being the green monster, I also made a gray one so I could pretend to be a Yeti. So we can have lots of fun with this story. And then if you don't have any yarn, I just took some tissue paper and I bunched it up in the middle, put an elastic around it, and then I just cut it in all these little strips. Now I didn't have a very long sheet, but it would still give you that kind of a hairy look. And if your head is smaller than mine, it might be just the right size for you. So have lots of fun with your monsters.